The following is a 20-minute segment of a 90-minute presentation for Potomac clients and invited guests. To be considered for future presentations, contact us at events@potomaccompany.com.
I do this because I do actually try to get back to the industry, and I really try to do my best to educate folks on what's going on in the market so that you can make as intelligent decisions as possible based on objective fact. I'm not going to go through a very specific presentation today. It's more of a fireside chat. We've got a ton of questions, and I'm literally going to just kind of talk through some questions. And very high level, I'm going to talk about some of the fundamentals of door-to-door valuation and M&A. I know the extreme majority of the folks on this webinar right now run kind of relatively small door-to-door businesses. And when I say relatively small, I'm talking about 20 million in revenue or less businesses. I have been talking about a door-to-door commentary that I've been writing. And with everything that was going on with my mother over the last couple of months, I have been away from writing. Patrick sucked me into this boardroom buzz, and now I've got a lot of M&A stuff going on. But I will be publishing that in the month of September. And what you'll see there is essentially the discounted cash flow analysis, as well as the cash on cash return analysis that Orkin and ServiceMaster use to value door-to-door businesses. One of the things I talk about in this commentary is I think it's important for people to make the distinction of whether they are bundling accounts to sell them, or they're actually building a long-term sustainable asset. I go back to this all the time. Every time I talk to door-to-door clients, I talk about that because those are two very, very different things. I have been known, not known, actually, I think unfairly, I have been perceived by a lot of young door-to-door guys out there that I do not like door-to-door, which is absolutely not the case. I try to talk in fact as opposed to fiction, and I think a lot of the things that I say makes them unhappy because, quite frankly, you own a $3 million in revenue door-to-door business, you're not going to sell it for 10 million bucks. That's just a fact, and I can't change that, and I'm not going to be like some of the advisors in our industry. PMP magazine recently published an article saying, door-to-door companies will eventually get the multiples they're worth and they're the best thing since sliced bread. I'm not going to sit around and give hand jobs to guys in the door-to-door industry and blow smoke. I mean, I'm just going to talk about objective fact. I've sold hundreds of millions of dollars of these businesses. I'm fortunate in that the clients that we have worked with have learned a lot from those processes, and so have I. I think before I get into kind of specifics, I only have a few slides here that I'm going to go into today, guys, because I think this is the cornerstone of what I want to talk about. And this is an old presentation. So Patrick, I want to be able to share this screen here. Can you make me the host so that I can do that? And every one of you absolutely get this commentary in September, probably towards the end of the month. And I'm also going to kind of record us walking through the valuation model. I'm bringing in actually one of the M&A guys in the industry from one of the strategic acquirers. And we're going to talk a little bit about it. I'm probably not going to publicize it widely, but if you took the time to visit with us today, I'll definitely make sure, Patrick will make sure you have it. When I think about a couple things that are important to think about, whether you're turning around and trying to bundle accounts and sell them, or you're a long-term, you're focused on building wealth in your business. The Boston Consulting Group came in back in 2011 or 12 and did basically the same project for Rollins as they did to ServiceMaster. They started with Rollins and they did a pricing study. And basically they looked at Orkin's customer base and started to focus on retention rates and pricing. And so one of the big things that Rollins did back starting in, I think, 2011 and 2012 is focus on how do we get incremental improvement in our bottom line without dumping a ton more money into sales and marketing. And the brilliant guys at BCG said, hey, just raise your pricing. And so they put together a report, and in that report, which I have read, they bucketed accounts into kind of three segments: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And so some of the analysis, and again, they did this for Rollins, and they, as far as I know, at least what I've been told by Service Masters, they resold it to not the same report, but they did the same analysis for Service Master. But really, these large companies bucket accounts, and they look at accounts on a short-term, medium-term, and long-term basis. And so once an account has been, whether it's a residential general pest account or a commercial account, once it's been with the company for 18 months or longer, it is considered a long-term account. The industry targets back then, residential, they were targeting 88% retention rates and 4.2-year retention rates on commercial. That's changed since then. Commercial's kind of stretched out from a target perspective since they did that report, but back in the day, that's what it was. Some key takeaways for me when they went through that process was, short-term, when you talk about account retention, I think one of the easiest ways, and the one that Rentokil uses, what they call portfolio analysis when they look at account retention, and it's extremely simple, and it's very clear and easy to understand. And I don't have some charts on it, but I think I can explain it. So whether you run a traditional business or a door-to-door business, one way to think about your customer attrition is to do portfolio analysis, which essentially is you pick a date, whether it's June 1st or January 1st. Let's use January 1st because it's easy. On January 1st, 2020, what specific accounts were on my books? So Jim Smith, Debbie Meyer, all those accounts listed out. And then of that cohort that was on your books as of January 1st, on December 31st of that same year, how many of those customers were on your books? That's called opening and closing portfolio. And that is a great way to really, you don't take new accounts into consideration. You look at opening and closing portfolio. Orkin's opening and closing portfolio analysis basically stipulates that they want to see an attrition rate of no greater than 2% per month. So if you're under 2% customer defection per month based on opening and closing portfolio, you haven't crossed what's referred to as the red line. And one of the things I do when I'm dealing with not only traditional companies as well as door-to-door companies is I always, we've got a traditional company, you pull the PestPack data, you get Report Writer, whether you're using PestRoute, Search Suite, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. I know PestRoute has a customer retention tool. I tend to skip all that, and I let the analysts dig right into those systems and actually generate those active setups on a specific date and do portfolio analysis. So all potential targets are essentially measured on whether or not they tend to cross that red line of 2% per month attrition or not. And when the big acquirers make acquisitions, they're looking at that monthly retention, and that monthly retention can just be done on a rolling, a January to the end of December, February 1st to the end of January, and you can just roll that and really get a sense of how that cohort analysis looks like. I think it's important to understand that accounts defect in a different manner. I mean, when we talk about somebody having an 80% retention rate, I think in everyone's mind, or let's say a 90% defection rate, people think of a constant rate defection pattern, meaning customers are going to, 10% of the customer base will disappear per year. So this thing on the left, but that's really not what happens in reality. What happens in reality is what takes place on the right, actual defection patterns. We know that a customer that's been around for 6 months is more risky than a customer that's been around medium term, 6 to 18 months, and more risky than a customer that's been around for 18 months. I have always said that if a door-to-door business or a summer sales business is doing what it should be doing and is servicing a customer in a substantially similar manner to a quote unquote traditional company, and we all know there's a lot of dog shit traditional companies out there, that a long-term customer should effectively retain in a similar manner than a traditional company. I am often confronted by young door-to-door folks who, I built a $4 million in revenue business, and 98% recurring, great pricing, great customer retention. I'm not crossing that red line. I mean, once my customer has been around longer than 6 months, I am retaining. Why am I not selling for 12 to 15 million bucks when the guy across town is? Why am I getting $1 or $1.25 or $1.50? At the end of the day, when you have what the acquirers do, kind of back of the napkin here, in a very high level perspective, is when you're valuing a going concern, whether it's a traditional business or a door-to-door business. Let's say you get a business like an Apter or an EcoShield or one of these companies that have really got critical mass. Now these are kind of self-perpetuating income-producing assets, and they will get different value. Acquirers will use different valuation methodologies. When you own a small pest control business that's come in on the doors, you've been around 2, 3, 4 years. If you've been around 4 years, it's easy to argue that half of your portfolio is not even in the long-term zone yet, because you've got a lot of attrition. The short-term, medium-term guys are still leaving. So, half your company might be in the short to long-term from a customer base perspective. And clearly, if you haven't been around a long time and you've been building that primarily on the doors, you are not selling a long-term sustainable income producing asset per se. You're selling a wasting asset. So what the acquirers do is they do something very different than how an acquirer would look at a large going concern, which is pick it apart account by account. So let's use an example of I run a summer stores. Patrick, he runs a summer sales business. He's got 100 accounts. He went out there, knocked doors. He's had them for a year. Year later, he's done a good job retaining those customers. Now he's got 90 accounts and he wants to sell it. I know this is a silly example, but let's take a look at it. He wants to sell those 90 accounts. Well, essentially what the acquirers do is they actually value the individual account. They're not valuing it as a going concern. It really doesn't have a reputation in the market. It probably is not doing a whole lot in digital marketing and direct mail and any of those other things. So they really parse it down and say, okay, what is the actual lifetime value of that customer? And here's kind of a back of the napkin. These numbers are not precise. This is for illustrative purposes. When I do the commentary, I'm going to actually use precise numbers. But literally, this is if we took a $400 per annum residential contract, and we said, okay, what is that account worth on we take a contribution margin of 30%. We take no synergies from route density, and I'm Orkin, and I want to buy that account. I know this is silly, and they're not going to buy one account, but if they did, what would it be worth? Well, they would be informed by largely the customer lifetime value of that account. And if we look at the bottom line here, the longer that account sticks around, essentially the more that it's worth. Now, I can tell you with 100% fact that when Orkin actually looks at door-to-door businesses, if a business is not considered, if a business is considered a summer sales business in their mind, they are assuming that it is a wasting asset and it's done in 5 years. Its lifetime value of the enterprise is 5 years. So on this customer, we've knocked it down to 5 years. This is the most we're considering doing. So that $400 per annum account is worth $238 to us. Well, they're paying more than 50 cents on the dollar for a door-to-door company. So how do they make this work? Well, that's where the analysis comes in from route density and other aspects of the business. And then we tend to see purchase price scenarios of somewhere between 70% and all the way up to $1.50, give or take, for small door-to-door businesses. Now, the market continues to change quite a bit. I would say on the door-to-door side, we are seeing, if we think about the acquirers out there in general, think about it historically. You've got ServiceMaster and Orkin. Past the Eclipse days, I mean, Orkin really didn't do any door-to-door deals until 2016. ServiceMaster was historically the buyer of first and last resort. And that's why you saw a lot of the kind of elder statesmen, or I can almost call them granddaddies of the industry, even though they're my age, essentially. The Waltons and the Royces and Shannon Coles and all these guys had traditionally had businesses acquired by ServiceMaster because they were the acquirer first and last resort. Um, I I feel like the market really began to open up in a large way for door-to-door companies in 2015. A lot of you youngsters out there like to kind of nip at the heels of the big guy, Royce, and you can think whatever you want to think about David Royce, but at the end of the day, he's been extremely successful building very, very valuable businesses. And I think in a lot of ways, it was what Royce was able to do in late 2015 with regard to the sell side process for Altera, which turned into a what I have said publicly, a train wreck for Terminix. But I have also said publicly, it's not in my mind as much of an Altera problem as it was a ServiceMaster problem. And I think anyone that knows me enough to actually get on this here seminar today knows I don't mince words when it comes to acquirers, and I'm certainly not mincing words when it comes to ServiceMaster. I mean, they turned what could have been a value creating exercise into a clearly value destroying exercise with that deal. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details there, but at the end of the day, the market began to change. It was late 2015, early 2016 that Anticimex began to look at door-to-door businesses. Massey began to acquire door-to-door businesses for the first time. EPS began to look at them. Rentokil toyed around with them. Anticimex did one door-to-door deal in October of 16. It was Green Star. We did that with American and has henceforth not bought any. I know that they are currently and continue to look at them. And I think it'll be a difficult go with Anticimex because I feel from a door-to-door perspective, these are the type of guys that like to put a small amount of money down on door-to-door businesses, but I know I've gotten myself off track. Patrick, what sort of questions have popped in? This is kind of a good breaking point. I've got a couple more key points that I want to make.
Yeah.